Transfiguration. This Sunday is Transfiguration Sunday, an important Sunday in the church year. I've preached on it numerous times. It's always the Sunday before Lent. I preached on it from many different gospel texts. Many gospels of the four gospels tell of this transfiguration story. For those of you who don't know the story, which I hope is very few, it is the story of Jesus taking 3 disciples, James, John, and Peter, up to the mountaintop. And I think it's important to stop at this time and to provide some context. That is a story that happened before this. Immediately before this, you hear in the Gospel of Mark about an interaction between Peter and Jesus. It's that interaction where Peter proclaims Jesus the Messiah. And Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, you are my rock. On you I will build the church." But then Jesus goes on to spoil the party and talks about death and suffering. And Peter says, no. We can't have any of that. And then Jesus says some harsh words, "Satan, get behind me," or "Adversary, get behind me." So in one breath, Peter goes from the rock of the church to Satan, the adversary. And yet Jesus still calls him up to this important moment up onto the mountaintop with 2 other disciples, an intimate group to take up there. And while they are up on that mountain, Jesus is transformed to dazzling white, and he stands between Moses and Elijah, the laws and the prophets, and they're having a conversation. Peter, of course, wakes up, and Peter, being Peter, always sticking the foot in his mouth, says they were terrified and didn't know what to say. So he said, "Hey, let's stay here. Let's build 3 booths, and let's just stay up on here in this mountain forever." And that is tempting when we are on the top of a mountain. Although this past year, you may have had fewer mountaintop experiences. Perhaps you felt like you've been in a valley this entire time since COVID. And perhaps that mountaintop seems like a distant memory, something in the rearview mirror. And yet, it is in those times where we need to hear Jesus just that more profoundly. After Peter says, "Let's just stay here," he hears a voice, the voice of God saying, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Sounds simple enough, yet we've been struggling with it in one way or another, at least most of us, for over 2,000 years. And perhaps that sounds familiar because it harkens back to another time where God spoke. And that was at Jesus' baptism, where God said to the crowd, to Jesus, "You are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." 2 different statements, yet related. The mountaintop says, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." Baptism says, "You are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." We cannot stay on the mountain as much as we would like to. We are called to go into valleys. Every person I know has had some form of suffering in their life. I'm not saying God causes suffering, and I'm also saying that suffering is inevitable in life in some form. And it's in those times where we need to listen to God that much more closely. Jesus was between Elijah, who represented the prophets, and Moses, who represented the laws. 2 pillars of faith. And yet both of these, at some point, wanted to throw in the towel. Moses, when he comes down off the mountain, finds people have created an idol. And just many times, I think, wanted to throw in the towel. And yet, that time when he really wanted to throw his towel was the time where he saw God. Elijah. Elijah tells a wonderful story of God not being in the fire and the earthquake, but in that still small voice. And perhaps in those valleys, those are times where we hear those still small voices. Voice that seems so faint, yet is ever present. And that voice is saying, listen, listen. And it is also calling us back to our baptism, where God not only said to Jesus, you are my beloved Son, but he said to us that I am God's beloved Son. You are God's beloved son or daughter, however you identify yourself. You are beloved. And in those valleys, we need to hang on to that. We need to hang on to that sense of belovedness. Those times where we want to hold on to things the way they are, if they're good, and times where we're in those valleys and just want things to change. We like comfort. We like things the way they are sometimes. And yet, God may be calling us to something different. We have to get off the mountain. We have to venture on and put one foot in front of the other. Even when it's scary, even when we don't want to go there. Imagine us living our life knowing that God had something in store for us, something better than we could even imagine. I think back to all the times in my life where I didn't do something. Some may call those regrets. But those times are rare in my life where I took a risk, trusted God, and did something. It may not have ended up the way I like, but yet I didn't live in regret. No matter how this past year has been to you, no matter how you feel about facing yet another Lent here in the midst of a pandemic, some of you may have felt like your Lent never ended. Know this. Know that God is with us in the mountaintops and the valleys. And if we hold on to that and believe that we are God's beloved, if we listen to God, if we follow God where God leads, where Jesus leads, then there is no mountain too high or no valley too deep that we cannot overcome. So this Lent, listen for that still small voice and dare to come down off the mountain. Amen.